Thank you, Professor Mahajan. Thank you, Professor Dipankar Gupta, and thank you, Dr. Ajay, and to JNU Academic. I really enjoyed preparing for this, but I'm not sure how I'll be able to deliver it. This anxiety takes me to Mistaken Modernity, which I read long time ago when I was doing my PhD, and recently I got an opportunity to get into Project Modernity. That's part of QED, India Test Social Theory. And this sort of reading, I would not really sure that I will be able to summarize, reiterate, or contextualize what Professor Gupta has already said, but I thought of choosing to do something else, to project something that can be made in the form of certain questions so that I get an opportunity to converse with him probably later. So to start with, I wanted to address this problem that Professor Gupta takes in the beginning of his preface, referring to Lévi-Strauss. That Lévi-Strauss, when he wrote about humankind as one which tries to portray certain cultural differences in cultural practices, but fundamentally fails to contradict. And that is the underlying universality at the level of consciousness he was embarking upon to take it further. And that spirals with some of the ideas which he has written in Mistaken Modernity to formulate certain key concepts, which he has already mentioned also in the previous talk, which I could not attend, but thanks to YouTube, spiraling those ideas of intersubjectivity, ethics, and the interesting way of looking at this idea of ontological sameness, which he calls iso-ontology, if I'm right, contrasting with polyontologies, which are part of non-modern societies. My premise here is to foreground certain impossibilities, which in a way responds to what he talked about, the dichotomous sort of possibilities and impossibilities, formulating what cannot be done in society, in democracy, and what can be done. And what cannot be done becomes the premise to think about what can be done. But I would like to place it in a register where in our disciplines, specifically social sciences, within what can be done, there is an underlying premise that what cannot be done. Not with the old dichotomy that he was talking about. But what cannot be done is again premised upon the ways in which societies, and when we particularly talks about South Asian societies, earlier we used the subcontinent or the Indian society as a generic understanding of the term. But then again, the impossibility of being modern, which he has elaborated in these works that we are familiar with. Now, what is this impossibility to become modern? For me, it's also a question that comes from disciplines which we belong to. So I wanted to contextualize this impossibility within sociology. When JNU Academic asked me to be part of this panel, I tried to escape, but then they suggested that they need somebody from sociology. But I told in my mind that I can't really defend the discipline of sociology because I tried my best, but I can't be really, I'm an unpatriotic to disciplines which I belong to, whether it is sociology or anthropology. But given this, I encountered ideas of pedagogy and research when it comes to the concepts which are of course different in nature when we use modernity, modernization, and modernism. And when we talk about modernity and modernization, I found in most of the sociological works in India, the term modernization goes forefront than modernity. And modernity becomes slightly accommodated or well accommodated in the disciplines such as English language and literature, cultural studies, or post-colonial studies. And modernity becomes a hard task for the sociologists to engage with, because it is understood to be representing the colonial or the Western, which he actually elaborated by making this differentiation between West-toxication and Westernization, which you are familiar with. I'm not really going to repeat that. But then, what is the problem with modernity is that is the impossibility I just wanted to talk about. The question that he draws from Hegel on the idea of the other, which came from later Hegel, not on the idea of the master-slave, but from philosophy of right, where he was talking about morality can be privatized, but ethics cannot. And he takes it to Emmanuel Levinas, when he was talking about the face of the other, how the deep dimension of the face of the other talks about other's own existence in an equal footing. And that's the dilemma, or that is the impossibility that modernity in this parlance about when we talk about social sciences in India actually face to take it further. Now, given that, let's think about the ethical, which is anchored in his the project Modernity, the 7th chapter from QED. When he places the idea of the iso-ontology, it doesn't precludes the differences, though hierarchies exist in modern society in the context of modernity, but it suggests that how the other can be accommodated in a sense that both spatially and temporally that holds some sort of, I would say, the idea of simultaneity, which I draw from the very underrated Dutch anthropologist Johannes Fabian, who wrote about the time and the other, how anthropology constructs its object way back in 1983, but still we grapple with the question of how, when in the context of research and teaching, when it comes to the question of the other. And that's the problem I wanted to place it further for his response. One is that when we think about modernity as an attitude, as a question of relating to the other people, it's not about gadgets or technologization or urbanization. When it comes to the understanding of the other in this particular context, we know that in sociology and anthropology in India, there's an array of works about studying the marginalized, or in some sense, understanding or recognizing the other with its own problems or concerns. Taking it from Rawls, when he was talking about intersubjectivity, it's all about how we participate in the lives of the other, or we share in their fate. So when we think about this participation in the life of the other, how the other is placed in the hierarchy, that Professor Gupta talks about the basic methodological principle of recognizing the other into the fold of the self. And that's how he's talking about this iso-ontology as the generic sense of that sameness with all its differences, acknowledging all its differences, how that other can be elevated with that simultaneity that Johannes Fabian was talking about. Now, given this, my problem lies in this question: what was the subject matter of society when Indian sociology took it from the beginning to the present? We all know that there are certain access points which became dominant tropes in studying society. Say, for example, the Indian village, Indian caste system, religiosity, that's where Hinduism and the many variants of, maybe we can say the folk and the greater and the little traditions were studied by anthropologists and sociologists. But then we find certain other emergent themes coming in the 90s and in the 2000s. But then I just wanted to juxtapose with this subject matter with the theoretical scholarship that we, as sociologists and anthropologists, anchor to. These are primarily Marx, Weber, Durkheim, and others like Alcott Parsons, Mertens, and others. Now, there are certain figures like George Simmel, this again underrated German sociologist who worked on interdependence small group dynamics, which I was teaching the other day to my students of popular culture, Norbert Elias. So there are several of such scholarships which are again in the periphery within the West, and also when they could not really travel, like W.B. Du Bois, Stuart Hall. They all accommodated some in other disciplines, because that is the puzzle that I mentioned in the beginning, because modernity was not really a concern in Indian sociology, whereas modernization was. Modernization is, again, the difference you are very clear about, how it's a kind of a colonial project that people should be modernized. It's like that, post-colonial thinkers like Dipesh Chakrabarty talked about the waiting room history. So given this, I just wanted to pose what was that impossibility of studying horizontally the societies rather than vertically. We have enough of top-down approach to the study of the society. What about studying society in a horizontal manner where the other is equally placed, both spatially and temporally? And this invites me to the question which I've been grappling for some years, that when sociology assumed to be a study of social relations and social institutions, when we think about social relations, we have two kinds of relations which have been explored by sociologists and anthropologists. One was explored very heavily, predominant sort of an exploration, that is of kinship. You'll find every textbooks of anthropology and sociology having a chapter on kinship and a number of studies on kinship. This is one set of social relations. But what is outside of studying kinship as social relation, the term friendship emerges. But we will see very clearly that disciplines such as philosophy could really engage or enter in the domain of philosophy, because there's no baggage of empirically take on to that. So that you will find from Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics to Derrida's politics of friendship, friendship was heavily dealt upon. But what was that impossibility of studying friendship in the parlance of sociology and anthropology? Because of this, the puzzle with horizontality. And this horizontality is also a question of temporality, which I draw from Fabian again, that there is a denial of coevalness and the denial of simultaneity when we encounter the margins or the marginals or the other. There is always a register in which we, as research, I'm talking about we responsibly by talking about who are the researchers and who are the subjects of study and who are the objects of study. And always the placement of the objects of the study behind one's own time. This was actually dealt by scholars, but when it comes to the study of subject matters like friendship in an empirical context, it becomes an impossibility because of probably the denial of a modern subject in quotes, to refuse to be an object of study. So that's why we come across very little works on studying on the equals and studying from bottom to up. Can I have 1 minute? Or
just 1 minute.
Just 1 minute. I would like to flag off why this becomes an impossibility in contemporary times. It's always talking about contemporary times is a risky affair, but I choose to talk. Now we find the question of ethics, I just wanted to turn it around in the context of, there is a compulsion to teach ethics of doing research and publication. And this ethics started from the Tuskegee problem in the United States to the present, now we will find that every other journal would say that if you are working on human participants, you need to get the ethical clearance from the boards which are part of your universities or institutions. Now, what really happens when the bottom-up studies started emerging? Suddenly there's a consciousness of, how I, being an elite or being part of the dominant or being part of the ruling subject or whatever it is, can be the object of study by reducing myself into what we call a kind of a bracketing that somebody else can come and study me. So this problem we find in current times, that how the question of ethics, of understanding, studying domination in some sense. We studied subordination and marginalization in number of ways, but the moment we started thinking about studying the dominant or studying the process of domination, this comes as an impossibility, and ethics, again the same ethics, becomes sort of a gatekeeping mechanism to curtail this sort of a process, which is, for me, the dilemma or the impossibility that modernity itself poses. So I once again thank JNU Academic for this opportunity, and if at all something else I could really respond to, I'll take that opportunity later. Thank you so much.
Thank you. As always, time has been